everyone. Thank you all for being here today. We're really excited for this presentation on putting data to action, community science partnership and advocacy for a healthy Schuylkill River. My name is Colleen Walters. I'm the Delaware River Basin Program Manager for River Network. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm located just outside of Philadelphia on the traditional lands of the Lenape people, the original protectors of the Delaware River. I'm joined today by my colleague, Ellen Kohler. She is from the University of Maryland Finance Center. If you want to wave, Ellen, say hello. And she's going to be helping us with the chat moderation today. And so I'm going to start off by just an introduction and diving in a little bit into what we mean by data to action and giving a brief overview of the Clean Water Act. And then I'm going to pass it along to Bartram's Garden for them to tell you the story about how they have been using their data for action, for policy action to help support a healthier Schuylkill River. So a little bit about River Network, for those who might be unfamiliar. We are a national organization. We work to connect and support water protectors throughout the country, working toward clean and ample water for people and nature. We have some new exciting things to share. We have a new online community where folks can get together and talk to other water protectors throughout the country to share their stories, to talk about what they have going on in their own watersheds. And we also have some free and paid membership level opportunities. So if you're interested in learning more about River Network or want to sign up for that online community, you can go to rivernetwork.org for more information. And so let's dive in here. So what do we mean by data to action? I think data to action can have so many different interpretations, and there really is no one definition, none that I could find anyway, about what data to action really means. And I think it does depend on the context and the particular situation that you're in. So for this particular conversation that we're going to have today, River Network put together a somewhat working definition of what we mean by data to action. And so that is using data to take action at the intersection of science and policy to advocate for change at the federal, state, and local levels to better protect rivers, streams, and communities. So we're really focusing on that intersection of science and policy, the science being the data aspect, and then policy being that action aspect. And I think that action piece is really where that interpretation can come from. And so we're curious what you all think about what data to action means. If this is a term that you have never heard before, what are the initial reactions that you have? Or if this is a term that you have been using for a long time, do you have your own working definition, or do you have your own different understanding of what it can mean? And so if you want to put that in the chat, and so we could see what other folks are thinking about what the term data to action means to you. So feel free to pop it in the chat. I know it can mean, in our sense, like I said, we're working with policy, but action can mean any number of things, right? It can mean outreach, it can mean working with your community members. What other ways are folks using their data to take action? And maybe you don't know, right? And maybe this presentation is going to give you a better understanding of what it could mean for you.
Great, so we're starting to get some responses into the chat. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. We've got a comment about it, finding that right first step to move toward action, about taking advantage of available data and information, help people connect to decision making, using data to influence influencers, understanding how we got here and where we might want to concentrate or prioritize. Great ways to think about how to use your data and put it into action. Influencing behavior. It could also be about changing behavior, right? And identifying needs. Doesn't always have to be in a policy context. Intersection of science and policy to advocate. Eric likes that. So we've got some thumbs up for the definition that you provided, Colleen, but also some ideas about it doesn't always have to be in a policy setting. And sometimes it's also like, how do I just get going? How do I, figure out what that first step is?
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you all for sharing. Really appreciate those insights. And so data to action starts with data, right? And we are going to be focusing today especially on local data. Your local organizations, the local watershed groups, the community scientists, they are the eyes and ears for your watersheds. And oftentimes the state agencies, they don't have the time or the capacity to really dive into each water body of their state, especially for a state like Pennsylvania that has so many streams and stream miles. And so the local data that the groups are collecting, it could be chemical, physical, biological, but also observational data, like who's using your waterway and how are they using your waterway, what fish are in your waterway. All of those, all that information can be valuable, particularly if you see patterns or concerns, if you see issues, if you see new sources of pollution. All of that information can be used to advocate for change for your watersheds. And so throughout this presentation, we want to just pose this question for you to keep in the back of your mind. How are you using your data right now? And are there ways that you could use your data for things like advocacy, for shining light on issues in your watersheds and bringing those concerns to your state or local agencies? And so the policy piece here starts with the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is a federal act, but the states are the ones who are really charged with implementing the Clean Water Act within their states for their water bodies. And oftentimes responsibilities are also flowed down through permitting enforcements to the local agencies, to your local governments and your local communities. So while the Clean Water Act is run by the EPA and it is a federal act, it's really the state and the local communities that have a big role in making sure that the goals of the Clean Water Act are achieved. And those goals being to eliminate the discharge of pollutants and to also seek fishable and swimmable waters where attainable. And so within the Clean Water Act, there is a framework that is set up to achieve those goals. And those are the water quality standards. The water quality standards have 3 components that are all interrelated. The first component is designated uses, or how your water body is being used. These can be human uses or ecological conditions, and they are officially recognized and protected by your state. And each segment, each water body is required to be designated for recreation and aquatic life uses to get toward that those fishable, swimmable goals of the Clean Water Act. And then you have water quality criteria. These describe the conditions that are necessary to protect each designated use. So in terms of recreational uses, for example, the criteria for that is usually in terms of bacteria loads, bacteria counts, and what level of bacteria is going to be safe enough for folks to recreate in those waters. Or if we're talking in terms of aquatic life, criteria could be in terms of dissolved oxygen. What level of dissolved oxygen is going to be enough for the fish that are swimming in those waters to survive, to reproduce, to migrate, what have you. And then there's the anti-degradation policy. So these protect all existing uses. They keep healthy waters healthy to make sure the waters aren't degrading. And then they also give stricter protections to outstanding waters. And so an example of designated uses, I pulled this from the Pennsylvania State Code because we are talking about Pennsylvania today in our presentation. So here's a list of all of the designated uses for Pennsylvania. So each stream in Pennsylvania is designated for these uses within the aquatic life, water supply, and recreation categories. However, there are some exceptions, and there's a notable exception today when we're talking about the Schuylkill River. The tidal tributaries along the the main stem of the Delaware from the Philadelphia area to the border with Delaware. Those tidal tributaries are not designated for water contact sports. Water contact sports being things like swimming or activities where contact with the water is likely. And so the tidal Schuylkill River that we'll be talking about today, its highest protections are going to be for boating, fishing, and aesthetics. And Chloe will get more into this as she goes through her presentation, but just wanted to mention it here as well. And so the Clean Water Act also sets up a series of opportunities for the public to engage, and a system of checks and balances, if you will, for the state to continually be reviewing and revising their own water quality standards. And so every 3 years, states are required to review their water quality standards and make revisions if necessary, if their water quality standards aren't meeting the protections that they're required to. And that's a process called the triennial review. Every 2 years, states also assess their streams, and they will report on the status of their streams and the impaired waters. And that's a process called the integrated report. Through the integrated report, there's also an opportunity for groups to submit their data. And that is what Bartram's will be talking about today, about how they submitted their data through the integrated report process. And then there are also opportunities through permitting processes, generally on a rolling basis, but they also have open public comment opportunities. So those are just some things to flag, and different ways that you all can use your local knowledge and data to engage with your states. And so now I'm actually going to stop my sharing and let Chloe bring her presentation up. And so Bartram's Gardens, they are going to talk about their amazing work that they've been doing for the last few years in their data collection and how they have used their data to action for advocacy purposes. So Chloe, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Colleen. Can everyone see the slides okay? Does that look good? Okay. Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us. And Colleen, are you able to pin me and Ammarava and Yasir?
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
Okay, thanks.
We
can go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Chloe Wang. I use she, her pronouns, and I am River Programs Coordinator at Bartram's Garden. This is my 5th season at Bartram's, and I'm responsible for our community science programming, as well as supporting public boating and fishing programs, teaching boat building, and working on many collaborative projects. I also serve on the steering committee and network development work group of the Alliance for Watershed Education. And I'm here with 2 young folks in our Denkyem River Guardians program, and I'm going to hand it over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Ammarava Mika-El. I am a Denkyem Water Guardian, and I am a team leader, and I have been with Bartram's for over 3 years now, supporting the Boathouse program and other social programs.
Hi everyone, my name is Yasir. I also am a Denkyem River Guardian team leader, and I've been there for 4 years. And right now, alongside the river program, I am a horticultural apprentice. So learning about all kinds of flowers and things like that.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to be presenting with both of you today. So Ammarava, do you want to go ahead and introduce Bartram's Garden?
Yes. Bartram's Garden is a historic garden and public park located on Lenape land in southwest Philadelphia along the lower Schuylkill River. It has multiple community programs with a focus on education on the river and garden flora, as well as community outreach. Bartram's Gardens also has a community boathouse. The boathouse facilitates accessible use of the Schuylkill River through free boating and fishing programs. The youth program that I am a part of works in conjunction with the Boathouse program. We help with other areas of the program, such as education, art, and creating social awareness. The boathouse is also supported by a large group of lovely volunteers.
The program is a bridge between man and nature. They both come together, stretching from distant lands to meet at this little river called the Schuylkill. This bridge allows for man to enjoy nature, to have laughs, to fish, to picnic, and to boat. In a city where gun violence is rising, it also helps to keep young people busy and off the streets. As for nature, this bridge allows for it to give man shade, food, tranquility, and contentment. Many people say that they've never felt more free and happier to be on the water. This boating program is where many people say that they truly feel that they're connected between nature and man. Also, there at our boating program, we have many kinds of programs for young people and for children too.
Oh, Yasir, you're muted. Did you want to add something?
Yes. Could you guys hear me all that time? I'm sorry. From my experience working on the boating program, I've really enjoyed learning how to communicate with people from all different kinds of backgrounds. It's such a joy seeing people come from all different countries, and yet, although the language may be a barrier, the water is what connects us. So just having something to connect people on, no matter where you come from, it's really been enjoyable.
Great. Yeah. So we have all these programs at the boathouse, but you know, and like in past seasons, we've had thousands of people come per season. But you know, that's those numbers would be even higher, except that we have to cancel about a quarter to a third of our programs every season. And Ammarava is going to speak about why that happens.
Combined sewer systems are systems that collect rainwater, wastewater, and raw sewage. The volume of sewage often exceeds the capacity of these systems and flow directly into the Schuylkill River through combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. That makes it very difficult to try to keep the river clean when we're accommodating guests, as there are over 40 CSOs along the Schuylkill River, which definitely increases the pollutants in the water. And it's a very big concern for the boathouse since we're allowing and facilitating these programs, and we want to make sure that all of our guests are safe.
Yeah, thanks, Ammarava. So CSOs are really a frequent and persistent source of pollution in the tidal Schuylkill, where water quality has otherwise greatly improved over the last several decades with the signing of the Clean Water Act and the closure of a lot of riverfront industry. And when the boathouse opened in 2015, the program cancellation policy was basically a best guess at what would be protective of boaters' health. Based on policies of other programs in other locations. But we really didn't have access to much empirical data on the pollution levels and dynamics of our particular environment, where the tide complicates things too, with the direction of flow switching 4 times a day. It's harder to model how long it might take for stuff to leave the river. So historically, very little water quality data has been collected by agencies or research institutions in the tidal section of the Schuylkill below Fairmount Dam, where all of the CSOs are. The Philadelphia Water Department does have a CSO prediction website, but it has not always been updated at the right times for us to make judgments about our programs, and the actual effects of CSOs are not well documented. So we had a lot of questions like, does our cancellation policy make sense? What are levels of harmful microbes actually like? And is there a clear relationship with the weather? And when we started to explore how we might actually measure this, other questions came up. of, what other water quality variables could potentially act as predictors for bacteria, since bacteria generally need to be cultured for 24 hours before they can be quantified, which only allows us to say how safe the water was yesterday. So that is a limitation. And we saw a meaningful opportunity for community science here because there were also already a lot of people in our community who care about these questions. The interns, the staff, and the cohort of over 100 boathouse volunteers who have strengthened their relationships to the river in running boathouse programs together. And then, of course, all the folks who come out to those programs to participate and are always so disappointed when we have to cancel. So we decided to start a program, and I want to note here how important partnership has been throughout the development of our program. I have a chemistry degree, but I had little knowledge of water quality monitoring going into this. And the folks at Stroud Water Research Center were really key in helping me to educate myself and recommending methodologies to look into the questions we were interested in. And then down the line, 2 expert volunteers doing work at White Clay Creek also helped me get started with DIY nitrate and phosphate measurements and multivariable modeling. So many thanks to everyone I've consulted on protocols. So in designing a study approach, we had to figure out what exactly to measure and what numbers to use as benchmarks. So we identified E. coli as a good indicator organism for fecal pollution in fresh water, and looked to these EPA guidelines for what E. coli levels reasonably support primary contact recreation. So primary contact means activity where you're likely to ingest water, like swimming. So these numbers are a little conservative for boating, but kayaking is increasingly considered to be a primary contact activity. And also we have many new boaters in our programs who it's their first time kayaking maybe. So we want to account for the risk of falling into the water. And we also use a lot of sit on top kayaks in which people get considerably more wet than in more enclosed boats. So in 2018, we ran a pilot program and then a full season program in 2019 with the high school interns and a self-selected subset of boathouse volunteers. And last year in 2020, in-person programming was limited due to the pandemic, but 4 of the intern team leaders, including Yasir, kept up this work. And Yasir is going to tell us a little more about E. coli and how we measure it.
Yes, E. coli. Where do we find it? E. coli gets into the river by means of fecal matter that comes from warm-blooded animals. We test E. coli by first taking samples of the water from the river, and then we place little droplets on the pallet, as you can see here. And then we put them in an incubator for 24 hours, and then we watch them grow. And we also have a blink where you can use for comparison. So as the E. coli grows, they turn into the blue little specks that you see here on the plates. And that's how we count our E. coli. And we do this just to make sure that we're keeping up with our safety policy to make sure that all the guests can be safe when we come to the river. Although it may take a day to get those results, it's just to test the cleanness of the water for that time as the tide goes in and out. It was a really fun experience to do. And it also showed us just how the weather can affect it. After a big rainstorm, there'd be more E. coli. And if it wasn't a lot of rain, there'd be less. So it shows how we can predict how much E. coli would be in the rivers.
Thanks, Yasir. So yeah, E. coli testing, very important. In addition to that active data collection, we had a mayfly sensor station installed in 2018 that continuously monitors several water quality parameters, recording readings every 5 minutes and transmitting them to the web. So this is part of a network of these mayfly stations throughout the watershed. And in the link at the bottom of the slide, you can see all our data on the web. We also have a portable meter to read pH, conductivity, and temperature, a digital rain gauge so we can measure rainfall right on site. Although I have learned that when you're near the mouth of a river, the weather all the way up to the headwaters is consequential, not just the very localized rainfall. And then we also have a colorimeter from this open source company called IO Rodeo that we use to measure phosphates and nitrates, which can be introduced into the water by sewage. So to share some of our preliminary findings, this is our full season of E. coli data from 2019 with some reference values. E. coli is measured in units of colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water. So the y-axis here is on a logarithmic scale, meaning the equally spaced markers go up by factors of 10. So you can see that E. coli counts range really widely from 0 to up in multiple thousands. And the red and yellow horizontal lines are those EPA values I showed before. So the yellow is the monthly geometric mean that should not be exceeded in order for a waterway to be considered swimmable. And the red is the statistical threshold value that should not be exceeded more than 10% of the time. And the blue lines are our actual monthly geometric means, which are above the EPA recommendation for every month on here except for May, which reinforces, unsurprisingly, that it's not a good idea to swim in the tidal Schuylkill. We've also found that there is not a terribly straightforward relationship between E. coli and rainfall. And I'll show some of our 2020 data to illustrate this. So give me just a second to move my screen share to a different window. And can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this plot that we're looking at now has kind of leveled up from the last one in that this is an online interactive plot made in Google Data Studio, which I learned how to use from Adam Griggs, who used to be at River Network. So the brown vertical bars are E. coli levels, and the blue line is rainfall. So you can see here, for example, that there was a huge flood on August 4th, followed by a pretty high E. coli count, as we would expect. But then if we look at what happened on August 23rd, it only rained about 1/10 of an inch, and the E. coli count the next day was nearly as high. So we've definitely seen elevated bacterial counts in drier weather and sometimes unexpectedly low counts after rain. And it seems like E. coli levels are actually the least predictable after small amounts of rain, which is when we really have to be deciding whether to cancel our programming. So I'm going to go back to my slides. Yeah, so going back to that original question about when to cancel boating, the E. coli and rain data do seem to pretty much affirm that our acting cancellation policy is the best we can hope to do on the tidal Schuylkill. So that is canceling within 24 hours of at least 1/4 inch of rain and also within a week of a large flood event. For days with rainfall below 1/4 of an inch, E. coli counts generally range between 0 and the 300s. So the standard I've chosen to work with here is the EPA and DEP, now a statistical threshold value of 410 CFU per 100 mil. So having a count below that number on any given day doesn't mean the water body is considered swimmable, but it seems like a cutoff that makes sense for us as kind of the best that we can do and still hope to ever run a program. So we still never really want anyone to fall out of their boat, but by this standard, we could ascertain that if we'd had programs scheduled on each of the 54 dates that we sampled in 2019 to 2020, our cancellation policy would have been 93% effective. So that seems pretty good. And that's how we've kind of applied our data internally. In addition to evaluating our policies at the boathouse, we've engaged with the policies affecting the river as a whole. So 2 years ago, we worked with Gail Killam, who was then at River Network, and Alice Baker, an environmental lawyer who was then with Penn Future, to learn about our local policy context and identify avenues for advocacy and how we could leverage our data. So Alice and Gail provided a really in-depth training to myself and my colleague, Joanne Douglas, who manages the youth program. And we worked together to deliver a similar training to volunteers. And based on all of that, we decided to submit our data to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and the Delaware River Basin Commission, which are the two agencies that have kind of confusingly overlapping responsibility for water quality standards on the tidal Schuylkill and throughout the Delaware River watershed. So this seemed like a compelling way to engage because, as Colleen mentioned earlier, the DEP does not designate the tidal Schuylkill for water contact. So those uses are not protected. And DRBC designates it for secondary contact recreation, but we want primary contact to be protected. So by submitting our data, we wanted to show that people are interacting with the waterway, and we've taken it upon ourselves to do our own assessment of water quality for recreation because they never have. And a lot of people could benefit if they took on some responsibility in addressing the impairment that we're seeing. So as Colleen also mentioned, the DEP accepts data from outside groups to inform a report on the health of state waterways that they publish every 2 years. So this presents the data they've collected to assess whether waterways are meeting the water quality criteria for their designated uses. And if a waterway is listed as impaired, that is the first step toward getting a plan in place to improve the water quality. A lot of the data in the report is outdated, and there are many assessments that have just never been conducted. And when DEP receives data from outside groups, they sort it into 3 tiers based on how much quality assurance there is. So only tier 3 data can be directly used for their assessment, and that requires following DEP protocols and going through an audit. Tiers 1 and 2 are not used for assessment, but can in theory inform DEP priorities and highlight trends. So we knew our data would not meet the requirements for tier 3, but that we could still use it to make a point and draw attention to the tidal Schuylkill. So I worked with volunteers and interns to also prepare a letter to accompany the data submission, which Ammarava and Yasir can speak more about.
So we had an interesting time writing this letter. And Yasir, I think we should talk about this together just because we all collaborated on it, but like to really show. I think I'm going to need help with this part. I don't know why I'm laughing. Anyway, so we decided to send a letter along with the data to explain our reasoning behind our submission and our numerous requests. And per suggestion from Yasir, we decided to implement this strategy of like you know, when you're a kid and you want to ask your parents something, but you know they're going to say no. So you're like, you're an amazing parent. Now can you buy me this Xbox or something like that? So we decided to implement a similar strategy, obviously a lot more precise and classy, but complementing the job that they had done. And even though we were not satisfied, we were thankful for the work that they had done. And then we decided to ask, in addition, that they do more. Instead of just trying to come with some of the feelings that we did have, such as resentment, we thought that it would be best to soften the blow. But yes, as you can see, we have a little quote from our letter, and just speaking of our feelings on the issue. It was very collaborative. We had so many different other interns and Bartram staff. We all worked together and put our ideas together and tried to write this letter in a comprehensive and understandable way. But we also tried to be straight to the point and not be too soft that they didn't take us seriously, but also not allow some of our resentment to get in the way. Yeah. Yasir, if you would like to say anything.
Yeah, it truly was a fun process. I really enjoyed all of us coming together and trying to figure out how we would word things. Each sentence was a different, a different topic of discussion, because we saw how valuable nature was, how beautiful it can be. And in a world where nature seems to be getting shut up by man and its growing population, we wanted it to be taken care of. So although we were thankful for the job that they were hardly doing, no doubt we still wanted more to be done. So we had to think about how could we ask them to do more in a way that doesn't seem demanding, where they would say no. So yeah, it was really good to get a lot of people's viewpoints on the matter as we all worked together and collaborated. And yeah, it just showed us how, as young people, we can all come together and make our voices be heard. And I think we did a good job at that.
I think so too. And I apologize. I realized this is not the quote that I meant to have on the slide, but I have included a link here to the full letter, which you can check out later if you're interested. I think these slides and the recording will be sent out after the presentation. So yeah, the letter did politely include a list of specific requests, which I would also recommend when speaking to agencies, to be really clear about what you're asking for. So these focused on a few points. One was designating the tidal Schuylkill for water contact, because under the Clean Water Act, existing uses need to be protected, even if the water quality doesn't currently support them. So if people are boating or swimming or paddleboarding or conducting ceremonies in water that isn't clean enough by state standards for those activities, the governments are supposed to still recognize and protect those activities and implement plans to get the water quality up to par to support them. So another one of our requests was for the agencies to update their criteria for water contact to be in line with the EPA standards, because they weren't actually using E. coli at that time. So we were kind of ahead of them in terms of what parameter to measure, if not in our own procedural rigor. And DEP has since adopted the EPA E. coli criteria for the summer months, which was already underway and by no means our doing. And they didn't adopt it year round as we asked here, but we did voice support for that. And the third major ask was to actually assess the tidal Schuylkill for its designated uses. We were sort of saying, you know, if our data isn't good enough for you, please collect some yourselves to meet this clear need. So since we've started this work, we've seen it expand and impact other initiatives. We made our submission right before the pandemic started, and over the last year, I followed up and had an exchange with someone at DEP in which I kind of picked apart the limited information on the title Schuylkill that is in the integrated report and asked a bunch of questions. And that at least resulted in them saying they'd make a correction in the next report. And Colleen has recently been talking with a few other groups about working with DEP to make them more receptive and collaborative toward outside groups with data to submit, looking to the example of better models that exist in the Chesapeake and in New Jersey. Bartram's is also part of a partnership of 4 environmental centers on the Schuylkill that pretty much span from the headwaters to the mouth. Burke's Nature in Reading, Schuylkill River Greenways National Heritage Area in Pottstown, who are the conveners of the project, and the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education and Bartram's in Philadelphia. And Stroud is also a partner on that project, and we're working with Princeton Hydro as like an expert consultant. So we're doing coordinated data collection that will ultimately inform clearer messaging for all of our sites to use around the health and safety of the river. And through that project, we analyze samples on site using our DIY method, but we also send duplicate samples to a DEP accredited lab for more sophisticated analysis. So we can get a sense of how accurate the DIY analysis is. Believe it or not, the accredited lab data still can't be considered tier 3 by DEP, but it sounds like we'll be able to submit it as tier 2, and that might serve as kind of a pilot submission to advance that effort of making DEP more receptive. Another upcoming effort is this Delaware River Roadmap project to make recommendations for how to improve water quality in the lower Delaware to support all of the recreation that already happens there. So the Water Center at Penn is doing some sampling that includes tributaries and specifically Bartram's Garden, which we're excited about. And I've shared our data and been in communication with them to inform their sampling plan, which will focus on some of our outstanding questions about how bacterial levels progress from dry conditions through a storm event and then after the storm event, as well as trying to parse sources of fecal pollution. So basically, like, is this from humans or geese? Which might shed some light on the elevated counts we sometimes see in dry weather. And finally, at Bartram's, we're working to just communicate about this work more publicly. So this webinar is an initial step, but it's definitely geared toward professionals in the field. And I've also been working on content for a web page to be part of the Bartram's Garden website with more data interpretation and visualization that I hope will be more accessible than some of the dry text-heavy slides I've presented today. And Yasir and Ammarava also participated in a wonderful video interview last year in which they spoke about this work really eloquently. So excited to continue getting the word out. And I will go quickly through this slide since we are a little tight on time, but I just, with respect to this idea of data to action, I just wanted to say that there's really not a one size fits all way to apply data. And if you're interested in engaging in advocacy, once you start down the path of learning the policy landscape of a certain place, there are just endless threads to pull on if you're willing to get down to the level of threads, which I am. I'm totally like a curious threads level person. So I was willing to have this very detailed back and forth with DEP and like get bounced around the bureaucracy. But ultimately, you have to kind of pick your battles and figure out what to prioritize, where it makes most sense to direct your energy and send a clear message. And in that vein, it's also helpful to be tuned into where there is collective momentum. There's been all this activity around water recreation in the lower Delaware recently, which has been really helpful to us. So yeah, it's also in thinking about how to be strategic and what are the smartest moves to make to support what you're trying to achieve. It's been really helpful to be in partnership with an organization like River Network that can help think through what makes most sense to pursue and, you know, just is very aware of what's happening in the larger picture. So to close, in reflecting on what we've been doing at Bartram's, I want to return to the fact that this work has a lot of purpose, not least of which is to try and model sound principles of community science. And I see us doing this in several ways. One is that we're investigating meaningful questions that meet a real need for information and that people already care about. We're also coming full circle by applying the data we collect in ways that respond to the problems motivating our questions. And advocacy importantly brings that to the level of governing systems, asking for accountability on the part of the entities in power rather than leaving it to community members to clean up the river. Thirdly, I try to facilitate this process in ways that are as participatory as possible throughout, getting feedback from everyone involved to shape the program. So it's not just the grunt work of data collection that is a group effort, but also the intellectual work of applying the data and giving input to new iterations of the project. And my colleague Joanne, who again manages the Denkyem River Guardians program, always emphasizes engaging young people as full participants who can do the same work as adults and contribute their voices with equal weight. So in our program, interns and volunteers all follow the same E. coli testing procedure, and they all contributed to the same letter. There wasn't like a separate youth section that claims to elevate their voices, but ultimately might be taken less seriously. So seeing the program take shape and grow to embody these principles has been really rewarding for me. And Ammarava and Yasir, can I ask you to just share some quick reflections on your experience and what's been rewarding for you?
Sure. I think what's been most rewarding for me is actually what you just emphasized. It was a community issue that was studied by the community, and it hasn't been resolved, but will be resolved because of the community. It wasn't an issue that was in the community and then someone else came and fixed it or did something. It was all by the people who cared about the issue and who were impacted by the issue and cared about it deeply. So that was what was really rewarding for me, and being able to be a part of the process, as well as you said, the youth interns and the volunteers and the Bartram staff, everyone was a part of it and was seen as being equal in the process. It wasn't just, oh, well, you are the youth intern, so you will collect the data and then we will write the letter because we are the adults in the situation. It was truly collaborative and just really showed community government and advocacy on the very basic level, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I agree completely with Ammarava, especially in the way that I feel that many people don't want to hear the opinions of us young people, especially, yeah, they don't want to hear the opinions of young people about things. So it was good to, for the adults in the situation to help us to raise our voice so that it could be heard. So I truly do appreciate how everyone just came together and we all wrote. It showed that when we all have a specific goal in mind, we can all reach it if we all, you know, work together as a team. So it showed me the importance of teamwork and even of family, how though none of us are related, through that we all got so close to each other that it felt like we were a family. So it just made me have a more appreciation for the people that I work with.
Thank you. Thank you both for your lovely thoughts. So that's it for our portion at the moment. And I think now we'll take some questions. If you have questions we don't get to today or want to really get into the weeds of any of this with me, feel free to send me an email. Thanks.
Oh, thank you all so much. That's such incredible work, and really applaud you for finding an issue and using your voice and using your collective community power to advocate for change. It's really inspiring. And if you can tell by the chat, folks are also very inspired by the work that you're doing. And Chloe, I also want to highlight something that you said too about data to action. Can mean so many different things and have so many avenues to go down. I feel like this journey that you and I have been going down through just having communication, having conversation with the DEP, asking questions. I mean, every little question that we ask, I feel like we get a little bit further, or we find new avenues of how to use the information that you all have been collecting. So really just would, really want to reiterate that message of asking questions and going down these little rabbit holes can be really valuable and can lead to eventually, hopefully, some protections for your watersheds. So I would love to take some questions. I think Ellen is going to be helping with to moderate that. So I'll pass it over to you, Ellen.
Yeah, so, and please, if you do have more questions, go ahead and stick them in the chat. We do have a couple that I think will be really interesting to address. So one is from Howard Norkrug, and he's asking, in essence, whether you guys have been able to learn anything about solutions to the E. coli problem. Has that been part of the training? Has that been part of your discussions among your group?
That's a great question. It's, this is a really hard problem to fix, which is something we're super aware of. And because it has to do with just the structure of the sewer system that underlies our city and that is so old. And I think the difficulty of changing that is one reason that it continues to be an issue. So yeah, I don't, I haven't been as involved in taking on that task of figuring out how a solution might be engineered. But yeah, I think I'm always excited to hear, about solutions like making a massive tunnel under the river that I feel like someone has told me about that just kind of diverts the flow of sewage. I think that would have to be, to redesign the sewer system would require a lot of just collaboration between the city and other entities. And then, at sort of a lower level than that, of course, I guess individual practices can have some effect in terms of conserving water. If you have less water in the sewer system when it rains, then maybe there will be less overflow. But I'm not really a fan of putting all of that burden on city residents and expecting that to be sufficient. I know that the city is working on this Green City Clean Waters initiative with like green stormwater infrastructure, but I don't know how much that will affect what we see coming out of the CSOs on a very immediate timescale.
Yeah, I think it's a very challenging situation, particularly in the part of the city that you're in. And Howard's offering to partner with you to talk about solutions. So there you go. You guys can have Howard over and have a good chat about some possible paths forward and what it's all gonna look like. I'm wondering if any of you, or if anybody, frankly, on the call and can answer in the chat, there was a question about, is there any tier 3 data that is submitted in Pennsylvania and accepted external to DEP. So Chloe, I don't know if in part of your conversations with DEP, you were able to identify whether there is anybody that's been able to submit data and meet that tier 3 requirement, or if anybody else knows about that.
That's a good question. I don't think that, at least I can't remember being aware of other groups who are set up to submit tier 3. And it basically involves using the DEP's own sampling plans and protocols, which are very specific. So
yeah.
I don't know that there's too many people other than them
who
can have reason to do that.
Yeah. So if anybody else who's part of the webinar has any additional information, if you could put that in the chat, that would be wonderful to learn. We have another question about what about other factors other than rainfall, like potentially temperature, that impact E. coli? Have you been looking into that?
We have, I mean, the idea that I had initially in, collecting all of these other parameters besides E. coli was hoping that we would be able to find like some combination of variables that would allow us to predict. And so far that hasn't been very successful. I did get some help trying to make multivariable models, but from season to season, it hasn't been very consistent with something that shows a really good fit. So I know there have been studies in other places where some combination of like temperature and seasonality and turbidity can come up with a good model, but we haven't been able to find that from our own data.
So I'm just wondering if Yasir or Ammarava has any other comments given the questions that have been asked. Go right ahead, Yasir.
I remember when I saw pollution for real for the first time, we had to dissect a few catfish from the river. And when we did it, we opened up their stomachs and we saw plastic inside of it. And that it made me so more cautious of what I do with my stuff after I use it. Usually you just see things floating on top of the river like trash, but never have I ever saw something inside of an animal before. So it shows that pollution truly is having a terrible impact on the river. So I do hope that sometime soon we can come up with something to stop it.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Yasir just said, we will often, and we still do, go up and down the tidal Schuylkill rowing along the side, and you would see a lot of deceased animals. That was not natural causes, it was because of the pollution. And it was just sad. You would see like slick oil-like substances on top of the water, and then you would see the factories on the other side. And we all know that they're probably putting things in the water, even if no one wants to say it. So it was just, especially when I initially started the program, it was all very discouraging. But at the same time, and Chloe did speak on this, civilians shouldn't have to be the ones to take up the grunt work of cleaning up the pollutants, but the fact that there are some things such as having rain barrels or planting more trees or urban gardens, obviously that's not going to have a substantial effect, but it's something. It makes me happier that there is something I can do. For example, I have a rain barrel, I have a garden, I'm planting trees. I try to clean up my gutter. So, you know, obviously we need to take this up to a governmental level, but it's important for me to be able to know that there's something I can do on an individual level just to help. I don't know if I want to say ease my own conscience, but help with the combat the things that I see on the water. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, well, we are over time, so thank you all for sticking around. I do see a couple more questions in the chat, but maybe we can, we'll collect those questions and we can do some responses by email after the presentation so we can continue the conversation that way. But I want to thank you so much Chloe, Ammarava, and Yasir. It was absolutely incredible to hear about your work. You're doing an amazing job, and thank you for all of the work that you do. This is being recorded, so I will send out a recording and we will have the PowerPoint sent out as well. I do also want to plug for folks in New Jersey, if you're interested, the New Jersey Integrated Report just came out yesterday. So if you want to dive into that and want to make some comments or want some help in reviewing, let me know. And again, reach out to me. I put my email in the chat. Reach out to me if you want to get more engaged in using your data for advocacy purposes. I'd love to have additional conversations with you all about that. So with that, I say thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Appreciate you all joining us today.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you.